My phone vibrated against the cold metal desk of the server room, the harsh buzzing sound cutting through the rhythmic hum of a million cooling fans. It was 6:15 in the morning on Christmas Eve. I was 12 hours into a brutal emergency shift, untangling a massive system failure for a logistics company. I picked up the phone, expecting my manager. Instead, I saw my home number. My stomach dropped. I swiped the screen. "Hello," I said, my voice rough from too much coffee and zero sleep. Silence met my ear, followed by a sharp, ragged intake of breath. Then, the tiny, trembling voice of my 9-year-old son, Hayes. "Dad?" he whispered. His teeth were audibly chattering. My blood turned to ice water. "Hayes, buddy, what is wrong? Where is Grandma?" He sniffled, a hollow, echoing sound that told me he was standing in the large foyer of our house. "They are gone, Dad. The house is entirely dark. It is so cold in here. I found a piece of paper on the kitchen island. It says they went to the cabin. It says they needed a break and they took the real grandchildren. They said not to call." Those words hit me like a physical blow to the chest. The real grandchildren. My vision tunneled. I gripped the edge of the metal desk so hard my knuckles turned white. I am a data systems architect. I build structures, firewalls, and failsafes for a living. I fix things when they break. But in that singular, agonizing moment, standing in a freezing server room smelling of ozone and burnt dust, I realized the most toxic virus of all was living right under my own roof. And it was time to purge it. "Hayes, listen to me." I kept my voice incredibly steady, burying the white-hot rage that was starting to boil in my gut. "I want you to go to my bedroom right now. Take the heavy down comforter off my bed. Wrap yourself up in it, and do not move. Do you understand? I am on my way." "The furnace is off, Dad," he said, his voice breaking. I tried to look in the fridge for some juice, but all the good food is gone. Even the cinnamon rolls we bought for tomorrow. They turned off the central heating. In late December, in a house where a 9-year-old boy was sleeping upstairs, they packed up the holiday groceries, disabled the thermostat to save a few dollars on the utility bill I paid, and drove off to a luxury winter vacation without him. My parents, Silas and Daphne. My younger brother, Blaine. Blaine's wife, Maeve, and their 2 kids. A house full of adults, a house full of family, and not a single one of them possessed a shred of human decency. "Get the blanket, Hayes," I repeated, my voice softening just for him. "I will be there as fast as I can drive." I hung up the phone and stared at the dark screen for 3 seconds. 3 seconds to mourn the family I thought I had. 3 seconds to accept the ugly, undeniable truth. I did not cry. I did not scream. I methodically locked my workstation, handed my security badge to the confused night supervisor, and walked out into the freezing dawn without a word of explanation. The drive home is a blur of gray asphalt and flashing streetlights. The heater in my truck was blasting, but I could not feel my hands. My mind was racing, compiling data, analyzing the structural integrity of the life I had built. I had spent the last 3 years keeping my family afloat. I paid the mortgage on the sprawling 5-bedroom house they currently occupied. I paid the utility bills they were so eager to minimize by freezing my son. I paid for the groceries they had just packed into their vehicle. I adopted Hayes 4 years ago from the foster system. He was a quiet, observant boy with eyes that had seen too much instability for a 5-year-old. I promised him, the day the judge slammed the gavel and made it official, that he would never feel unwanted again. I promised him a home. I promised him safety. And today, on the morning before Christmas, the people who shared my DNA had shattered that promise while I was working a double shift to afford their lifestyle. I hit the steering wheel with the heel of my palm once, twice. The sheer malice of the note burned in my mind. We took our real grandchildren. It was not just an abandonment. It was a calculated, deliberate strike at a child's deepest insecurity. They knew he struggled with his place in the family. They knew he overheard their whispered comments at family dinners. They knew, and they weaponized it. As I turned onto my street, the affluent suburban neighborhood looked picturesque under a fresh dusting of snow. Holiday lights twinkled on manicured lawns. And there, sitting at the end of the cul-de-sac, was my house. Dark, silent, and imposing. The driveway was empty. The massive SUV my brother drove, which I had co-signed the loan for, was gone. I threw the truck into park, killed the engine, and sprinted to the front door. My breath plumed in the freezing air as I punched the security code into the keypad. The heavy oak door swung open, revealing a wall of stagnant, frigid air. It was barely above freezing inside. "Hayes!" I called out, my boots echoing on the hardwood floor. I found him in the living room, curled into a tight ball on the sofa, swallowed by my oversized gray comforter. He looked so small, a tiny island of misery in a massive, empty house. When he looked up at me, his eyes were red, but he wasn't crying. He held a piece of torn notebook paper in his shivering hand. I knelt beside the couch and pulled him into my chest, wrapping my arms around him and the blanket. He buried his face in my shoulder, taking a shaky breath. "I am here, buddy," I whispered fiercely into his hair. "I am right here." He pulled back slightly, holding up the crumpled piece of paper. His lower lip trembled as he looked into my eyes. "Dad," he asked, his voice barely a whisper, "does real mean I am fake?" Fan 2. The Museum of Pain 1252. That question tore through my chest like jagged glass. "Does real mean I am fake?" I took the torn notebook paper from his trembling hand. The handwriting belonged to my mother, Daphne. The cursive loops were elegant, a stark contrast to the sheer cruelty of the message. I read the ink over and over, letting the toxicity of the words brand themselves into my memory. "Listen to me, Hayes," I said, gripping his small shoulders firmly, forcing him to meet my eyes. "You are my son. You are as real as the air I breathe and the blood in my veins. The people who wrote this are the ones who are fake. Do you understand me? Their words mean nothing. You are my family." He gave a small, jerky nod, wiping a stray tear from his cheek with the back of his sleeve. I stood up, keeping one hand on his shoulder. The house was so cold I could see my own breath. I needed to get him warm and I needed to get him fed. But as I walked toward the kitchen, leading Hayes away from the dark living room, the ghosts of the past 3 years rose up to meet me, turning my own home into a museum of my failures. How did I let it get to this point? It is a question I will ask myself for the rest of my life. It started 3 years ago. I had just closed on this house, a beautiful property in a great school district, meant to be a fresh start for me and Hayes. 2 weeks later, my brother Blaine showed up at my office. Blaine was the golden child, the entrepreneur of the family. He always had a pitch, always had a scheme, and always needed funding. His latest tech startup had crashed spectacularly, leaving him, his wife Maeve, and their 2 kids facing eviction. My parents, Silas and Daphne, who had always enabled Blaine's delusions of grandeur, begged me to help. They suggested moving in together, combining resources just for a few months until Blaine got back on his feet. 3 years later, they were still here. The few months turned into a permanent occupation. I walked past the dining room, looking at the large mahogany table. I remembered a dinner from 6 months ago. Maeve had been showing off a new designer handbag on Instagram, complaining about how hard it was to find good domestic help. Later that exact same evening, I had quietly logged into my banking app to pay the $600 electric bill for the house, along with the private school tuition for her children, my nephew and niece. I paid it because my parents told me, with tears in their eyes, that the kids should not suffer for Blaine's temporary setbacks. I was the responsible one. I was the one with the high-paying tech job. It was my duty. We reached the kitchen. I opened the massive double-door stainless steel refrigerator. It was practically barren. The expensive cuts of meat, the artisan cheeses, the fresh fruit, the holiday baking supplies, all gone. Only half a jar of cheap mustard and a wilted head of lettuce remained. They had packed up the food I paid for to feed themselves on a vacation they did not invite us to. I closed the fridge door, the soft thud echoing in the empty room. My gaze drifted to the hallway leading to the family room. That hallway was the true testament to their malice. Last year, on the anniversary of Hayes' adoption, I had commissioned a beautiful, professional portrait of the two of us. I bought an expensive oak frame and asked my mother to hang it on the gallery wall in the hallway, right next to the massive family portraits of Blaine, Maeve, and their kids. When I came home from work that day, the portrait was sitting on the floor in the home office. I asked my mother why she had not hung it. Daphne had looked at me, swirling her glass of red wine, and said with a terrifyingly casual tone, "Declan, darling, it just throws off the aesthetic. He does not carry the family features. It looks disjointed. People will ask questions. Let us just keep it in your private rooms, shall we?" I should have thrown them out that day. I should have packed their bags and changed the locks. But they had perfected the art of guilt. Silas had pulled me aside later, telling me Daphne was just stressed, that she was traditional, that I needed to be the bigger person and not fracture the family over a piece of wood and glass. They gaslit me into submission, playing on my ingrained sense of duty. I looked down at Hayes. He was standing in the middle of the kitchen, clutching the comforter around himself, watching me with wide, cautious eyes. He was waiting for me to explode. He was waiting for the yelling, the throwing of objects, the chaotic rage he had known in his life before I found him. I knelt down again, placing a hand on his cold cheek. "I am going to make things right," I told him, my voice devoid of anger, filled only with cold, calculated purpose. "You and I are going to have the best Christmas ever. But first, we need to get you warm." I pulled out my phone and dialed the one person in this neighborhood I actually trusted, Mrs. Veda. She was a retired middle school teacher, a widow who lived in the smaller house next door. She had always been a quiet ally. When my family ignored Hayes in the yard, Mrs. Veda would invite him over to help plant hydrangeas or bake cookies. She saw through my family's polished veneer on day one. She answered on the second ring. "Declan? It is very early, dear. Is everything all right?" "Veda, I need a massive favor," I said, keeping my voice low. "My family has left. They turned off the heat, took all the food, and went on a trip. Hayes is freezing. Do you have anything warm over there? I need to stay here for a few minutes and document some things before I bring him over." I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Those absolute monsters," she hissed, her sweet grandmotherly voice hardening into steel. "Bring that boy to me right now. The kettle is already on. I have fresh pancakes. Do whatever you need to do, Declan. Do not let them get away with this." "I am bringing him over," I said. I wrapped Hayes up tightly in the blanket and walked him across the frost-covered lawn to Veda's house. She opened the door before we even reached the porch, pulling him inside into the overwhelming warmth of her home, smelling of cinnamon and old books. She took one look at his pale face and wrapped her arms around him. "You are safe here, sweetheart," she murmured, glaring over his head at me. "Go do your work, Declan. I have him." I nodded my thanks and walked back across the yard. The freezing air felt good against my skin, cleared my head. I walked back into my dark, cold house. I did not turn the furnace back on. I wanted the house exactly as they had left it. I pulled out my phone and opened the camera app. I walked through the kitchen, taking a photo of the empty refrigerator. I photographed the thermostat, clearly showing it had been manually turned off. I went into their bedrooms. Suitcases were missing. Drawers were open. Bathroom counters were wiped clean of toothbrushes and expensive skincare products. I photographed everything. Every missing item, every empty space. This was no longer my home. This was a crime scene, and I was gathering the evidence. Fan 3 embracing life. 12:52 I walked back down the stairs, the silence of the large house pressing in on me. I paused in the living room, standing where the Christmas tree sat in the corner. We had decorated it 3 days ago. I remembered the exact moment. Hayes had carefully placed his handmade ornaments on the lower branches while Blaine's kids fought loudly over the best spots near the top, egged on by Maeve. My parents had sat on the couch, drinking eggnog, oblivious to the fact that Hayes had eventually retreated to the stairs, watching the real grandchildren claim the spotlight. I stepped closer to the tree. I carefully unhooked every single ornament Hayes had made. The clay snowman with one crooked eye, the macaroni wreath painted gold, the folded paper stars. I placed them gently into a small cardboard box I found in the pantry. I would not leave a single piece of his joy in this toxic environment. With the box under my arm, I walked into my home office and shut the heavy double doors. I sat down in my leather ergonomic chair and powered up my dual monitors. The screens bathed the dark room in a harsh blue light. I am not a violent man. I do not scream and I do not throw punches. My world is governed by logic, by inputs and outputs, by cause and effect. If a system is compromised, you do not yell at the system. You isolate the breach, you sever the connection, and you rebuild the firewall. My family was a catastrophic security breach, and it was time to initiate a hard reset. I pulled out my phone and looked at the photo of the note again. We took our real grandchildren to the cabin. We needed a break. A cabin. During peak holiday season. A red flag went up in my mind. A massive, glaring error in their operational logic. Blaine was broke. His credit score was a myth, and his bank accounts were perpetually overdrawn. Silas and Daphne lived on a fixed retirement income that barely covered their extravagant social outings, which was why they relied on me for housing and utilities. Maeve had not worked a day in her life. So, how exactly does a family with zero disposable income afford a last-minute luxury cabin rental at a winter resort on Christmas Eve? My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I opened a secure browser window and logged into my primary banking portal. I checked my checking account, my savings, my investment portfolios. Everything was intact. No unusual withdrawals. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Then I remembered the emergency firewall. 2 years ago, Silas had suffered a mild heart flutter while I was out of town at a tech conference. Daphne had panicked, claiming they didn't have the funds to cover the immediate out-of-pocket emergency room copays. When I got back, I ordered a secondary credit card attached to one of my high-limit accounts. I gave the physical card to Silas. "This is for medical emergencies only," I had told him, looking him dead in the eye. "If someone is bleeding or someone's heart stops, you use this. Nothing else." I clicked on the credit card tab in my banking portal. The page loaded. My heart stopped. Right at the top of the pending transactions list, dated yesterday afternoon, was a charge. Whispering Pines Luxury Resort and Spa. $4,500. I stared at the screen, the numbers blurring for a fraction of a second. $4,500. They had stolen my money to fund a vacation to escape my child. They had used the card meant to save their lives to spit on mine. A strange sensation washed over me. It wasn't anger anymore. The hot, burning rage from the morning had evaporated, replaced by an absolute, glacial calm. This was the catalyst. This was the irrefutable data point I needed. They had crossed the line from emotional abuse to financial theft. I reached for my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. Callahan picked up on the third ring. Callahan was not just my best friend since college. He was one of the most ruthless and effective corporate litigators in the city. We played squash on Thursdays. He knew my family. He knew the situation, and he had been telling me to cut the cord for years. "Declan." Callahan's voice was gravelly with sleep. "It is 7 in the morning on Christmas Eve. Unless you are in jail or someone is dead, this better be a butt dial." "I need you to wake up, Cal," I said, my voice completely flat. "I need your legal brain right now." There was a rustling of sheets, and the tone of his voice instantly shifted from annoyed to razor-sharp. "What happened?" "They left," I said. "Silas, Daphne, Blaine, Maeve, and the kids. They packed up this morning, turned off the heat in the house, took all the food, and drove to a ski resort. They left Hayes alone in the house with a note saying they needed a break and took the real grandchildren." Dead silence on the other end. Then a low, dangerous whistle. "Jesus Christ, Declan. Are you and the boy okay? Where is he?" "He is safe. He is next door with Veda. But it gets better, Cal. They financed this little getaway using the emergency medical credit card I gave my father. $4,500 pending charge at Whispering Pines." I heard Callahan get out of bed. I heard a door shut. Okay, listen to me very carefully. You are currently in the blast radius of a highly toxic situation. What is your objective? Do you want me to call the police for credit card fraud? No, I said instantly. Family fraud is messy. They will claim I gave them verbal permission. It turns into a he-said-she-said nightmare, and it drags out for months. I do not want a messy legal battle. I want them gone. I want them out of my house, out of my life, permanently, and I want it done legally so they have zero recourse to ever step foot on my property again. Eviction, Callahan said, the word snapping like a whip. They are tenants at will. Do they pay you any rent? Even a single dollar? No, not a dime in 3 years. Do they have a lease? No, we never signed anything. It was supposed to be temporary. Perfect, Callahan said. His voice was gaining momentum, the lawyer brain fully engaging. In our state, without a lease and without paying rent, they are considered guests who have overstayed their welcome, or at best, month-to-month tenants at will. You need to serve them with a formal notice to quit. Because there is no lease, you can revoke their permission to reside on the premises. Usually, it is a 30-day notice, but given the circumstances of abandonment and theft, we can draft a severe notice to vacate. We give them a hard deadline to remove their property. Can I lock them out right now? I asked, looking at the door. Legally, no. That is a self-help eviction, and they can sue you for that. You have to do it by the book. You serve the notice. If they do not leave by the deadline, we file an emergency injunction with the court. But Declan, listen to me. If you serve this notice, you cannot be in that house when they get back. It will be a war zone. You and Hayes need to be gone. I know, I said. I am already making arrangements. Draft the notice, Cal. Make it ironclad. Email it to me in the next hour. I am printing it and leaving it on the kitchen island. Write exactly where they left their note. Consider it done, Callahan said. And Declan? Good for you. It is about damn time. I hung up the phone. The game board was set. I turned my attention back to the dual monitors. I had a lot of work to do in the next few hours, and I was going to enjoy every single second of it. Fan for The Audit of Betrayal 1152 with Callahan drafting the legal kill shot. My mind shifted to the tactical retreat. I needed a secure location for Hayes and myself, a place where they could not find us, harass us, or beg their way back into our lives. I opened a new tab and navigated to a premium corporate housing website. This wasn't the time for a cheap motel or a cramped hotel room. Hayes had been made to feel small and insignificant in his own home. I was going to give him the exact opposite. I filtered the search for luxury penthouses in the downtown district, 20 miles away from the suburbs. High security, concierge service, fully furnished, panoramic views of the city skyline. I found a stunning 2-bedroom unit on the 42nd floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a modern chef's kitchen, and a massive soaking tub. It was outrageously expensive for a 1-month short-term lease, but I did not blink. I entered my personal card details and paid the balance in full. The confirmation email pinged in my inbox instantly. Move-in ready. Today. With housing secured, I turned my attention back to the banking portal. The $4,500 charge at the ski resort was a glaring, painful wound on the screen, but it acted as a lens. It made me realize I had been intentionally blind to the financial hemorrhage happening in my own life. I clicked on the account history and requested a full download of the past 36 months. 3 years of bank statements, credit card bills, and utility payments. The system took a moment to compile the data, the little loading icons spinning on the screen. When the massive spreadsheet finally populated, I exported it to a data visualization tool I used for work. I needed to see the big picture. I needed the raw, unfiltered truth of my exploitation. I set the parameters to isolate every expense that was not directly related to my personal survival, the mortgage, or Hayes' well-being. I filtered for groceries, dining out, streaming services, private school tuition, car insurance for the SUV, medical bills for my parents, and discretionary spending tied to the cards I had allowed them access to. I hit execute. The software processed the data and generated a bright red sum at the bottom of the screen. $142,680. I stared at the number. The digits burned into my retinas. $142,000. It wasn't just a number. It was hours of my life. It was nights I spent awake configuring servers instead of reading bedtime stories to Hayes. It was vacations I didn't take. It was a college fund for Hayes that could have been fully funded by now. I started scrolling through the itemized list, the cold logic in my brain dissecting the audacity of their spending. There was the $800 charge at a high-end salon for Maeve, categorized under groceries at a superstore because she bought a gift card there to mask it. There was the $1,200 set of custom golf clubs Silas had purchased last spring. When I had noticed the charge, he had claimed it was a necessary expense to network with potential investors for Blaine's startup. There was the monthly cable and internet package, $250 a month, specifically upgraded to include premium sports channels and international reality TV packages because Daphne complained the basic tier was depressing. And then there was Blaine. Blaine, who hadn't contributed a single dollar to the household in 3 years, yet somehow managed to maintain a leased luxury SUV and a wardrobe that belonged in a GQ magazine. I saw the trail of cash transfers. $300 here for business meetings, $500 there for software licenses that didn't exist. I had enabled a parasite, and the parasite had nearly bled the host dry. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel like crying. The betrayal was so absolute, so profoundly deep, that it bypassed grief entirely and went straight to a pristine, crystalline focus. I opened the card management dashboard. With a series of precise clicks, I initiated a scorched earth protocol. I locked the emergency credit card Silas had stolen. I locked the secondary grocery debit card Daphne used. I canceled the autopay authorization for the leased SUV. I logged into the streaming service accounts, every single one of them, changed the passwords to complex alphanumeric strings, and selected Sign Out of All Devices. As I was terminating a premium movie subscription, my cell phone, sitting on the desk next to the keyboard, lit up. The caller ID displayed Silas Cell. I froze, watching the screen glow in the dim office. My heart beat a slow, steady rhythm against my ribs. It was 7:40 in the morning. They had likely been at the resort for a few hours. They probably went to the extravagant resort dining room for a lavish holiday breakfast, sitting by a massive stone fireplace, laughing about how peaceful it was without the dramatic foster kid ruining their aesthetic. And then the waiter would have brought the leather folio with the bill. Silas would have confidently slipped my emergency card into the fold, only to have the waiter return 3 minutes later with a polite, apologetic smile. "Declined, sir." The phone kept ringing. The vibration rattled against the wood of the desk. I imagined the panic setting in, the realization that their golden goose had just snapped its own neck. I picked up the phone. I didn't answer it. I swiped my thumb across the screen, hitting the red decline button. Then, I went into the settings, selected Silas's contact, and hit block. I repeated the process for Daphne, Blaine, and Maeve. If they wanted to communicate with me, they could do it through the legal system. The era of open access to my life was officially over. A notification popped up in the corner of my monitor. An email from Callahan. The subject line read, "Notice to quit attached." I opened the email and downloaded the PDF document. It was a masterpiece of legal aggression. No flowery language. No emotional appeals. Just a cold, hard assertion of property rights. Effective immediately. Your permission to reside at this property is hereby permanently revoked. You have exactly 7 days from the date of this notice to remove all personal belongings from the premises. Failure to vacate will result in the immediate filing of formal eviction proceedings, civil lawsuits for unauthorized financial expenditures, and potential criminal trespass charges. All future communications must be directed to my legal counsel. I hit print. The laser printer in the corner hummed to life, spitting out 3 crisp, white copies of the document that would detonate my family. Fan 5. The perfect escape 1102. I took the 3 freshly printed copies of the eviction notice and laid them carefully on the desk. They felt heavy, like a physical manifestation of a boundary being drawn in concrete. I slipped 1 copy into my leather briefcase for my records. The other 2 were destined for the house. I walked out of the office and grabbed a large rolling suitcase from the hall closet. I moved with purpose, an efficiency born of adrenaline and absolute clarity. The mission was simple: extract the target, Hayes, secure his belongings, and leave no trace of our emotional presence behind. I went up the stairs to Hayes's bedroom. His room was the one place in the house I had fiercely protected. The walls were painted a deep, calming navy blue, and glowing stars covered the ceiling. I opened the suitcase on his bed and started packing. I didn't just pack clothes. I packed his sanctuary. I carefully folded his favorite sweaters, the ones he wore when he wanted to feel hidden. I packed his entire collection of graphic novels, stacking them neatly at the bottom of the case. I took the small, battered stuffed fox he had brought with him from the foster system 4 years ago, the only possession he had when he walked into my life. I packed his sketchbook, his colored pencils, the small bedside lamp shaped like a rocket ship that he read by every night. I looked around the room, making sure I hadn't missed anything crucial. The room felt different already. Stripped of his personal items, it was just a space. The soul of it was in the suitcase. I zipped the bag shut and dragged it into my own bedroom across the hall. My packing was much faster, brutally utilitarian. Suits for work, casual clothes, my laptop, my external hard drives, the fireproof lockbox containing our passports and Hayes's adoption papers. I didn't pack anything sentimental from my past. The photos of my parents, the childhood mementos Daphne had insisted I keep on my dresser. I left them right where they were. They felt like relics from a life that belonged to someone else. I hauled the suitcases downstairs and staged them by the front door. The house was deathly quiet. I put on my heavy winter coat and walked back across the frostbitten grass to Mrs. Veda's house. When she opened the door, the smell of maple syrup and bacon hit me like a warm wave. I walked into her small, cozy kitchen. Hayes was sitting at the table, wearing one of Veda's oversized knitted cardigans, his cheeks flushed with warmth. A massive stack of half-eaten pancakes sat in front of him. He looked up at me, the fear in his eyes replaced by a cautious curiosity. "Hey, buddy," I said, pulling out a chair and sitting next to him. I ran a hand through his hair. "Are you feeling warmer?" "Yeah," he nodded, taking a sip of hot chocolate from a mug that was almost as big as his head. "Mrs. Veda makes the best hot chocolate. She puts actual chocolate bars in it, not the powder. She is a genius," I agreed, offering a small smile to Veda, who was leaning against the counter, watching us with a fiercely protective gaze. I turned my attention back to Hayes. I needed to explain the next steps without terrifying him. I needed him to understand that the chaos was over, and the control was back in my hands. "Listen to me, Hayes," I said softly, but firmly. "We are not going back into that house today." His eyes widened slightly, a flash of panic crossing his face. "Are we going to the cabin? With them?" "No," I said instantly, leaving no room for doubt. "Absolutely not. We are never going anywhere with them again. The way they treated you this morning, the note they left, that was wrong. Completely and utterly wrong. And my job, my only job in this entire world, is to protect you. I failed to do that this morning, but I am fixing it right now." He stared at me, processing the words. "Where are we going?" "I rented us a new place, an apartment high up in the sky, right in the middle of the city. It has giant windows, a huge TV, and a bathtub so big you could probably swim in it. We are going to go there right now. We are going to order the biggest pizza we can find. We are going to watch movies until our eyes fall out, and we are going to have our own Christmas." A small, fragile light ignited in his eyes. "Just us. Just us," I promised. "No yelling. No fighting over the TV. No one telling you to be quiet." He looked down at his half-eaten pancakes, a tiny smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Can we get pepperoni?" "We can get double pepperoni," I said. I stood up and turned to Veda. "I cannot thank you enough for this, Veda." She stepped forward and wrapped me in a tight hug, surprisingly strong for a woman her age. "You protect that boy, Declan. You do whatever you have to do to those vultures. And you call me if you need anything. I will keep an eye on the house. I will let you know the second they show up." I appreciate it, I said. We are going to head out. I have a few final things to take care of in the house before we leave. I helped Hayes put his coat back on. We walked back across the yard. I told Hayes to wait in my truck, turning the engine on and blasting the heat so he would stay warm. I walked back into the house for the final time. The perfect escape was almost complete. I just needed to set the trap. Fan 6. Setting the trap. 10:52. The house felt like a tomb. The air was stale, cold, and heavy with the impending consequences of their actions. I stood in the foyer, listening to the hum of the refrigerator in the distance, the only sign of life in the massive structure. I didn't go crazy. I didn't take a baseball bat to the walls, I didn't smash Blaine's expensive and unpaid-for electronics, and I didn't bleach Daphne's designer clothes. Property damage is a crime, and I was not about to give Callahan a headache or give my family a shred of legal ammunition against me. My revenge was going to be entirely systemic. I was going to cut the lifelines. I walked into the kitchen and stood over the massive granite island. This was the exact spot where they had left the torn piece of notebook paper. The spot where they had casually dismantled my son's sense of belonging. I took one of the printed eviction notices from my pocket. I placed it squarely in the center of the granite island. I smoothed out the paper, ensuring every harsh, legally binding word was visible. Then, I reached into the junk drawer, pulled out a heavy crystal paperweight I had received as a corporate gift years ago, and set it down firmly on the top edge of the notice. It looked official. It looked permanent. I took the second copy of the notice and walked to the front door. Using a piece of heavy-duty packing tape, I taped the notice to the inside of the door at eye level. It would be the very first thing they saw when they managed to get inside. With the legal requirements fulfilled, I moved to the infrastructure. I walked into the utility closet in the hallway. The main internet router and modem were mounted on the wall, blinking with a steady green rhythm. The lifeblood of Blaine's fake business and Maeve's endless social media scrolling. I didn't just unplug it. I reached up, unscrewed the coaxial cable from the wall port, gathered the power cords, and placed the entire router setup into a cardboard box. I was taking the hardware with me. The account was in my name, and I was terminating the service effective immediately, but I wasn't going to leave them the physical equipment to try and establish a new connection. Next, I walked to the garage access panel on the wall. The keypad controlled the massive double doors. I popped the plastic cover off, punched in the master reset code I had memorized when I installed it, and wiped the memory. I entered a new, randomized 12-digit code. Their remotes in the SUV would no longer work. They would not be able to pull their car into the heated garage. They would have to park in the driveway in the freezing cold and carry their luggage to the front door like strangers. I walked back into the kitchen. I looked at the thermostat on the wall. They had turned it down to 40 degrees to save my money so they could spend it on a luxury cabin. I reached out and turned the dial. I didn't turn it up. I turned it completely, entirely off. Let the pipes freeze. Let the house become an icebox. It was no longer my problem. If they wanted to come back to a cold house, I was going to ensure it felt like the Arctic. I did a final sweep of the ground floor. Everything was in its place. The house was immaculately clean, painfully silent, and utterly devoid of the warmth that makes a house a home. It was just a structure of wood, glass, and drywall waiting to collapse on the people who had abused it. I locked the back door. I checked the windows. I walked out the front door, pulled it shut behind me, and listened to the heavy, satisfying click of the deadbolts sliding into place. I walked down the driveway to my truck. Hayes was sitting in the passenger seat, staring out the window, his breath fogging the glass. I climbed into the driver's seat and put the truck in gear. "You ready?" I asked him. He looked at the dark house, then looked at me. "Are they going to be mad?" "Probably," I said, pulling out of the driveway and turning down the street, not looking back in the rearview mirror. "But their anger cannot reach us anymore, Hayes. We are offline. We are out of their system. From now on, it is just you and me." As we drove away from the suburbs and toward the towering glass skyline of the city, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a single, sharp vibration, a text message slipping through the firewall. I pulled it out at a red light and glanced at the screen. It was an automated alert from my banking app. Transaction declined. Whispering Pines Resort Spa. Amount, $450. Reason, card locked. They were trying to buy breakfast. I locked the phone screen, tossed it into the center console, and smiled for the first time that day. The trap was set, the jaws were snapping shut, and the best part was, they had absolutely no idea the extent of the devastation waiting for them at home. The holiday had just begun. The penthouse was exactly what I had paid for. An absolute sanctuary of glass and steel hovering 42 stories above the city. When I walked through the double doors with Hayes, his eyes went wide. The living room was massive, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the downtown skyline. A massive, plush sectional sofa dominated the center of the room, facing an 85-inch flat-screen television. The kitchen was a chef's dream, stocked with complimentary snacks and high-end beverages by the concierge team. It was quiet up here. The thick glass completely muted the sounds of the city below. For the first time in 3 years, I felt my shoulders drop. I was not bracing for an argument. I was not waiting for someone to ask me for money. We spent Christmas Eve eating a massive double pepperoni pizza, exactly as I had promised. We sat on the floor in front of the windows, watching the snow begin to fall over the city lights, eating pizza right out of the cardboard box. Hayes laughed when I accidentally dropped a slice of pepperoni on my shirt. It was a real, genuine laugh, the kind I had not heard from him in months. Later that night, I drew a hot bath for him in the massive soaking tub, complete with a ridiculous amount of bubbles. He splashed and played until his fingers were wrinkled. By the time I tucked him into the guest bedroom, wrapped in high thread count sheets and his favorite oversized comforter, he was out cold before his head even hit the pillow. Christmas Day was even better. I had ordered a ridiculous amount of gifts to be delivered via a premium courier service. We spent the morning opening Lego sets, a new video game console, and an entire stack of graphic novels. We ate pancakes for breakfast, burgers for lunch, and Chinese takeout for dinner. We did not talk about the house. We did not talk about my parents or Blaine. We just existed in our own little bubble of peace. But while my physical world was peaceful, my digital world was a war zone. I had left my phone on silent, tucked away in my bedroom, but occasionally I would go check it just to monitor the situation. The barrage of notifications was staggering. It started slowly on Christmas Eve, mostly confused text messages from Maeve. "Hey, did you freeze your accounts? My card just got declined at the spa." A few hours later, the tone shifted. "Declan, this is not funny. Blaine is furious. Unfreeze the cards right now." By Christmas Day, the confusion had turned into outright panic. I had over 40 missed calls, a mix from Maeve, Daphne, and Blaine. They were calling from the resort's landline, likely because their own cell phones were burning through data they could no longer pay for. I read the voicemails through the automated transcription service. Daphne was crying in one of them, claiming that Silas was having chest pains from the stress of not being able to pay the hotel bill. I knew it was a lie. If Silas was truly having a medical emergency, they would be at a hospital, not leaving angry voicemails from a luxury resort lobby. I did not reply to a single message. I deleted the voicemails. On the afternoon of the 26th, my phone buzzed with a call from Callahan. I walked into the bedroom and shut the door so Hayes wouldn't hear. "Merry Christmas, you absolute menace," Callahan said, his voice crackling with amusement. "I hope you are enjoying your holiday, because I have been doing some digging, and I have a present for you." "I am listening," I said, leaning against the glass window, looking down at the tiny cars navigating the snowy streets. "So, you know how Blaine is always talking about his tech startup? How he is just one funding round away from a massive buyout?" "Yes," I replied. "It is the reason I have been housing his family for 3 years." "Well, it is completely fake," Callahan said smoothly. I pulled the corporate filings. His company filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy 8 months ago. It is completely dissolved. But that is not even the best part. He has been taking out massive personal loans from high-interest predatory lenders to maintain his lifestyle, and he used your home address as his primary residence on all the loan applications. There are currently 3 active debt collection agencies looking for him. They have been mailing notices to your house. I closed my eyes, letting out a long, slow breath. 8 months. He had been bankrupt for 8 months, living in my house, eating my food, driving a car I paid for, while treating my son like a burden. And my parents had covered for him. They had to know. Do you have the documentation for this, Cal? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. I have it all packaged in a neat little PDF file, Callahan replied. I will email it to you right now. Use it wisely. I hung up the phone. The pieces of the puzzle were finally clicking together perfectly. I walked back out to the living room. Hayes was sitting on the rug, intensely focused on building a complex Lego spaceship. He looked up and smiled at me. I smiled back, feeling a surge of protective energy that bordered on ruthless. Hey buddy, I said, do you want to order some ice cream? Can we get the one with the peanut butter cups? He asked, his eyes lighting up. We can get 2 of them, I said. As I ordered the dessert, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. My son was safe, happy, and fed. And somewhere, for hours away, my family was realizing that their entire house of cards had just collapsed. If you are watching this and you have ever been used by your own family, if you have ever been gaslit into believing that their financial failures were somehow your responsibility to fix, drop a letter W in the comments down below. W stands for win because taking your life back from toxic people is the ultimate victory. I will be reading and liking every single comment with a W, because I know exactly how much strength it takes to finally cut the cord. Subscribe to the channel because the storm is just getting started. For days after they left, the waiting game finally ended. It was 2 o'clock in the afternoon on December 28th. I was sitting at the kitchen island in the penthouse, drinking a cup of coffee, when a notification popped up on my phone screen. Motion detected, front door camera. I tapped the notification, and the live video feed loaded on my screen. Fan 8, the proverbial kitchen table, 1252, the high-definition camera feed from my front porch was crystal clear. The massive black SUV, the one I had essentially been paying for, pulled aggressively into the driveway. It did not pull into the garage because, of course, I had wiped the access codes. I watched as Blaine got out of the driver's side, slamming the door. He walked up to the garage keypad, punched in the old code, and waited. Nothing happened. He punched it in again, hitting the buttons harder. Still nothing. Through the microphone on the camera, I could hear him yelling over his shoulder. The keypad is frozen. The stupid thing will not open. Maeve got out of the passenger side, pulling her designer coat tight against the bitter wind. Well, use the front door key, Blaine. It is freezing out here, and I am not standing in the driveway all day. The rest of the family piled out of the car. My parents, Silas and Daphne, looked exhausted and furious. The 2 kids looked miserable. They all dragged their heavy suitcases up the icy walkway to the front porch. Blaine jammed his key into the deadbolt and turned it. He pushed the door open, and the group shuffled inside, complaining loudly about the cold. I immediately switched the camera feed on my phone from the front porch to the interior living room camera, and then to the kitchen camera. I had installed these cameras years ago for security, but today, they were broadcasting the greatest reality show I had ever seen. The interior of the house was 40 degrees. I could see the visible puffs of condensation as they breathed. Why is it so cold in here? Daphne complained, her voice echoing in the empty foyer. Declan, where are you? Turn the heat up. Silence answered her. He is probably at work, Silas grumbled, dropping his bags on the hardwood floor. The boy works too much. That is why he is so high-strung. They walked past the living room, completely failing to notice that Hayes's blanket was gone, that his favorite lamp was missing, that the house was entirely devoid of our presence. They headed straight for the kitchen, the heart of the home, the place where they expected to find food, warmth, and the comfort of my resources. I watched on the screen as Daphne walked into the kitchen first. She stopped dead in her tracks. The camera angle perfectly captured the massive granite island. Sitting directly in the center, weighed down by the heavy crystal paperweight, was the stark white notice to quit. "What is this?" Daphne asked, her voice dropping the complaining tone, replaced by genuine confusion. She reached out and pulled the paper from under the crystal. Silas walked up behind her, peering over her shoulder. Blaine and Maeve trailed in a few seconds later. I watched as Daphne's eyes scanned the legal document. I watched her lips move as she read the words, "permanently revoked," "eviction proceedings," and 7 days. The color drained from her face so fast she looked like a ghost. She dropped the paper onto the counter as if it had physically burned her. "What does it say?" Blaine demanded, snatching the paper up. He read it, his face contorting from confusion to absolute, explosive rage. "He is trying to kick us out," Blaine yelled, his voice cracking. He slammed his hand down on the granite counter. "This arrogant, ungrateful jerk is trying to throw us out on the street." Maeve snatched the paper next. 7 days? He cannot do this. This is illegal. We live here. Call him, Silas commanded, his voice shaking. "Call him right now, Daphne. This is just a misunderstanding. He is throwing a tantrum because we took a little vacation." Tantrum. That is what they called my reaction to them abandoning my son. My phone started ringing in my hand. The caller ID flashed Daphne's number. I had unblocked them 10 minutes prior, anticipating this exact moment. I let it ring 3 times. Then I answered. "Hello, Mother," I said, my voice smooth, calm, and utterly devoid of emotion. "Declan, what is the meaning of this piece of trash on the counter?" Daphne's voice was shrill, borderline hysterical. "Where are you? Why is the house freezing? What game are you playing?" I leaned back in my chair at the penthouse, watching them on the live feed. "It is not a game, Mother. That piece of paper is very real. Just like the piece of notebook paper you left for my son on Christmas Eve. You have 7 days to remove your belongings from my property." "You cannot do this to family," she screamed, the sound distorting through the phone speaker. "We needed a break. Hayes is too much to handle. You are overreacting. He is 9 years old," I said, my voice dropping an octave, the coldness finally leaking through. "He is 9 years old, and you left him alone in a freezing house with no food and a note telling him he was not a real part of this family. You made your choice. Now I am making mine." I heard a scuffle over the phone, and then Blaine's voice came through, loud and aggressive. "Listen to me, you smug tech nerd. You cannot legally evict us in 7 days. We have tenant rights. I will drag you through housing court for months. I will tie this property up in so much litigation you will beg us to stay. You hear me? We are not going anywhere." I took a slow sip of my coffee. I watched him on the screen, his face red, a vein bulging in his neck. "Is that right, Blaine?" I asked softly. "That is right," he sneered. "Okay," I said. "Let us talk about legality. Let us talk about the $4,500 you stole from my emergency medical credit card to pay for your little cabin getaway. The card that was strictly authorized for Silas's medical use." Silence. Absolute, deafening silence on the other end of the line. On the video feed, I saw Blaine physically take a step back. Silas turned to look at his golden son, his jaw dropping open. "I have the statements, Blaine," I continued, my voice echoing in their silent kitchen. "I have the timestamped charges. I have a very aggressive corporate lawyer who is itching to file felony credit card fraud charges with the district attorney. So you can pack your bags and leave quietly in 7 days, or the police can come escort you out today in handcuffs. Which legal route would you prefer?" Fan 9, cutting the supply lines 11:52. "You wouldn't dare," Blaine whispered. But the bravado was completely gone from his voice. It was replaced by a thin, reedy panic. On the camera feed, Maeve was staring at him in horror, realizing that the luxury vacation she had been bragging about on social media was funded by stolen money. "Try me," I said, and I hung up the phone. I did not block their numbers this time. I wanted the silence to stretch. I wanted them to sit in that freezing kitchen and realize the absolute totality of their situation. I watched the live feed for another 5 minutes. They were arguing now. Silas was yelling at Blaine. Daphne was crying, leaning against the counter. Maeve had grabbed her 2 children and retreated upstairs. It was a beautiful implosion, but I was not finished. They were still standing in my house. They were still breathing my air. I opened my laptop and pulled up the contact information for the local utility companies. First, I called the water department. I navigated the automated menus until I got a representative on the line. I provided my account number, my security PIN, and my address. "Hi," I said politely. "I need to request an emergency shutoff of the water main at this address. The property is currently vacant, and I suspect a pipe might have burst due to the cold weather. I need the valve shut off at the street immediately to prevent further damage." The representative was highly accommodating. "Of course, sir. We will dispatch a technician to shut off the street valve within the next 2 hours." Next, I called the electric company. I went through the same verification process. "I need to suspend service at this address effective immediately," I told the agent. "I am the homeowner, and I am no longer residing at the property. Please cut the power to the meter." Because I had an excellent payment history and the account was solely in my name, they processed the request without hesitation. They informed me a remote signal would be sent to the smart meter to disconnect the power within the hour. I closed my laptop. The irony was almost poetic. They had intentionally turned off the furnace to save my money, leaving my son to freeze. Now they were going to experience true cold. No water to flush the toilets. No electricity to charge their phones or run space heaters. Just the bitter, biting chill of a massive house turning into a concrete icebox in the middle of winter. My phone buzzed. A text message from Silas. "Declan, please be reasonable. We are family." The note was just a bad joke, a lapse in judgment. Daphne was tired. You know how she gets. Hayes is a tough kid, he is fine. You cannot throw us out over a misunderstanding. We need to sit down and talk about this as a family. We have to be forgiving. Gaslighting. Classic, textbook gaslighting. Minimizing the trauma, shifting the blame, demanding forgiveness without offering a shred of genuine remorse. He didn't care that his grandson was terrified. He only cared that his free ride was abruptly ending. I opened the email Callahan had sent me, the PDF containing the bankruptcy filings and the active debt collection warrants for Blaine. I downloaded the file, attached it to a text message, and sent it directly to Silas, copying Daphne, Blaine, and Maeve on a group thread. I added one single line of text below the attachment. "You have 6 days and 20 hours left. If you are not gone by the deadline, this file goes to the local sheriff's department, and I will let them know exactly where Blaine has been hiding." I tossed the phone onto the sofa. I was done communicating. There would be no sit-down conversations, no tearful apologies, no family therapy sessions. You cannot negotiate with a virus. You can only eradicate it. The next 2 days were a masterclass in watching people break. Through the security cameras, I watched as the reality of their situation set in. When the power went out, they panicked. I saw Blaine pacing the living room wrapped in a blanket, his breath visible in the air, frantically trying to make calls on a dying cell phone. Without water, the house quickly became unsanitary. They were forced to melt snow from the backyard on a camping stove Blaine found in the garage just to have drinking water. They looked miserable. They looked broken. And I felt absolutely nothing for them. I spent those days focused entirely on Hayes. We explored the city. We went to a massive indoor trampoline park where he bounced until he was exhausted. We went to a science museum and spent hours looking at dinosaur skeletons. We ate street food, we watched movies, we laughed. I watched the tension slowly leave his small shoulders. He stopped looking over his shoulder. He stopped apologizing for taking up space. He was realizing that he was the center of my world, and that no one was ever going to push him aside again. Fan 10, The Office Ambush 1202. It was day 5 of the eviction countdown. I had gone into the corporate office for a few hours to finalize the end-of-year system updates. Hayes was back at the penthouse with a trusted, highly paid professional nanny I had hired through an agency, watching movies and eating popcorn. I was sitting in my glass-walled office on the 10th floor, reviewing a line of code, when my desk phone rang. It was the security desk down in the main lobby. Mr. Vance, the head of security, a massive former Marine named Marcus, said. His voice was tense. We have a situation down here. 2 men are demanding to see you. They claim to be your father and brother. They are being extremely loud and disruptive in the lobby. Sir, shall I have them removed from the premises? I closed my laptop slowly. Of course they came here. They had no power, no water, and no leverage at the house. They were desperate, and desperate people do stupid things. They thought they could embarrass me in front of my colleagues. They thought social pressure would force me to cave. Hold them there, Marcus, I said, standing up and buttoning my suit jacket. Do not let them pass the turnstiles. I am coming down. I walked out of my office and headed for the elevators. As the doors opened on my floor, I saw Callahan stepping out. He had come over to drop off some physical documents for my signature. He took one look at my face and stopped. Who do I need to sue? Callahan asked, adjusting his briefcase. My father and brother are throwing a tantrum in the main lobby, I said, stepping into the elevator. Callahan's eyes lit up with a dangerous kind of glee. Oh, excellent. Hold the door. I love a good public humiliation. We rode the elevator down in silence. When the doors pinged open in the massive, marble-floored lobby, the sound of Blaine's voice was echoing off the high ceilings. I demand to see my brother, Blaine was shouting, pointing a finger at Marcus, who was standing behind the security desk looking completely unbothered. He is illegally holding my family hostage. He turned off our water. He is a monster. You need to call him down here right now. Silas was standing slightly behind Blaine, looking haggard and embarrassed, glancing around at the corporate employees who were stopping to stare at the commotion. I walked across the lobby, my footsteps echoing on the marble. Callahan walked right beside me, a shark smelling blood in the water. I am right here, Blaine, I said, my voice cutting through his shouting. Blaine spun around. He looked awful. He had not showered in days. His clothes were wrinkled, and his eyes were wild. He marched toward me, stopping just a few feet away, jabbing a finger in my direction. You think you are so smart, Declan? Blaine yelled, spittle flying from his lips. You think you can just throw your own flesh and blood out onto the street? Mom is sick. The kids are freezing. You are tearing this family apart over nothing. A crowd was starting to gather. Employees with coffee cups, executives waiting for guests. They were all watching. Blaine wanted an audience to pressure me. I was going to give him a show. I did not tear the family apart, Blaine, I said, my voice loud enough to carry across the lobby. You did that when you abandoned my 9-year-old son in a freezing house on Christmas Eve to go on a luxury vacation paid for with a stolen credit card. Gasps rippled through the small crowd of onlookers. Silas closed his eyes, his face turning a deep shade of crimson. It was a mistake. Blaine scrambled, trying to lower his voice now that the narrative was shifting. We just needed a break. You are overreacting. You have to let us stay. I need that address for my business. Callahan stepped forward, opening his briefcase and pulling out a crisp manila folder. What business would that be? Exactly, Mr. Vance? Callahan asked, his voice projecting with the practiced resonance of a courtroom litigator. Would that be the technology startup that filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy 8 months ago? Blaine froze. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Callahan didn't stop. He turned slightly, addressing Silas, but making sure the entire lobby heard. Or perhaps he needs the address to dodge the 3 separate debt collection agencies currently pursuing him for over $90,000 in defaulted personal loans. Loans, I might add, that were fraudulently obtained using my client's primary residence. Silas stared at Blaine, absolute shock registering on his face. The blinders were finally brutally ripped off. The golden child was a fraud, a thief, and a failure. And the son he had constantly belittled was the only one holding the entire structure together. Is this true? Silas whispered, grabbing Blaine's arm. You said the company was doing great. You said you were finalizing funding. Blaine pulled his arm away, looking trapped. He turned back to me, the anger replaced by a pathetic, desperate pleading. He dropped to his knees right there on the marble floor. "Declan, please," Blaine begged, tears welling up in his eyes. "I have nowhere to go. My credit is ruined. Maeve is threatening to take the kids and leave me. I am bankrupt. If you kick me out, I will be living in my car. Please, man. You are my brother. Have some mercy. Where are we supposed to live?" I looked down at him. I remembered the note. I remembered the shivering frame of my son wrapped in a blanket. I remembered 3 years of financial abuse and emotional manipulation. I felt nothing but cold, hard apathy. "I hear the county homeless shelter has an excellent central heating system, Blaine," I said smoothly, "and they offer free meals. It is a step up from the house right now. You have 2 days left. Get off my property." I turned my back on them and walked toward the elevators. I heard Marcus, the security guard, step in. "All right, gentlemen, time to go. Let us walk to the exit." Fan 11. The Exodus 1152 Day 7 arrived with a bitter, biting cold that seemed fitting for the occasion. I did not go to the house. I had zero desire to oversee their departure or engage in any last-minute dramatic altercations. Instead, I sat in the penthouse, drinking premium coffee, and watched the grand finale unfold on my iPad via the security camera feeds. It was absolute chaos. They had rented a cheap, beaten-up moving truck. Without the garage door opener, they had to park it at the end of the driveway, forcing them to haul every single piece of their belongings across 30 yards of snow and ice. The audio feed from the front porch was a symphony of dysfunction. Maeve was screaming at Blaine. The revelation of his bankruptcy at my office had apparently been the final nail in the coffin of their marriage. She was throwing his clothes into garbage bags, yelling about how he had ruined her life, how he was a pathetic liar, and how she was taking the kids to her sister's house in another state. Blaine was arguing back, dropping boxes, slipping on the ice. Silas and Daphne were moving slower, looking aged and broken. Daphne was carrying out her designer clothes on hangers, weeping loudly. Silas looked like a man walking to his own execution, silently loading boxes into the back of the truck. My phone vibrated on the counter. A text message from Maeve. "Declan, I am so sorry about everything. I had no idea Blaine was bankrupt or that he stole your card. Your parents pressured us into leaving Hayes behind. I love Hayes like my own nephew. Please, can the kids and I stay just for a few more weeks until I figure things out? It is not my fault." The flying monkey was trying to change sides now that the ship was sinking. She was perfectly happy to mock my son and spend my money when the account was full, but the moment the consequences arrived, she was the victim. I typed out 2 characters, a thumbs-up emoji. Then I hit block. By noon, the house was mostly empty. They had stripped their rooms of everything they owned. I watched as Daphne walked out onto the front porch holding a small box. She stopped and looked over at Mrs. Veda's house. Veda was outside on her porch, wrapped in a heavy winter coat, aggressively sweeping a tiny dusting of snow off her pristine walkway, clearly just watching the spectacle. Daphne sniffled loudly, trying to project her voice. "It is a tragedy, Veda, an absolute tragedy what this world is coming to. A son throwing his own sick mother out into the street over a simple misunderstanding. Family means nothing anymore." She was trying to control the narrative. She wanted the neighbors to think I was the villain. Veda stopped sweeping. She leaned on her broom, adjusting her glasses. She looked Daphne up and down with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. "Well, Daphne," Veda called out, her voice ringing clear across the frozen lawns, "at least you are leaving with the only things you ever truly cared about. Take your time leaving, you real grandmother. And do not let the door hit you on the way out." Daphne's mouth snapped shut. She turned pale, hurried down the steps, and practically ran to the passenger side of the moving truck. 10 minutes later, the rusty engine of the moving truck sputtered to life. I watched the vehicle slowly back out of my driveway, lumber down the street, and turn the corner, disappearing from view. The house was empty. The driveway was clear. The silence on the camera feed was profound. I let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in my lungs for 3 years. The weight was gone. The parasite had been fully extracted. I picked up my phone and called Callahan. "They are gone," I said. "Excellent," Callahan replied. "I will have a locksmith head over there right now to change every single lock on the doors and recode the electronic systems. A cleaning crew will be there tomorrow morning to scrub the place top to bottom. Do you want me to turn the utilities back on?" "Yes," I said. "Turn them back on. Make sure the heat is set to 70 degrees. Are you and Hayes moving back in this weekend?" I looked around the penthouse. I looked through the doorway to the living room, where Hayes was sitting on the rug, drawing a picture of a rocket ship. He looked so peaceful. He looked completely unburdened. I thought about that house. I thought about the hallway where Daphne refused to hang his picture. I thought about the kitchen island where they left that horrific note. I thought about the 3 years of tension, arguing, and disrespect that had soaked into the drywall. "No," I said, my voice firm and resolute. "We are not moving back in. Not ever." Fan 12. The Real Grandson and the Final Move. 10:52 a week later. The snow had melted, leaving the neighborhood looking gray and dormant. I drove my truck down the familiar street, with Hayes sitting in the passenger seat. He was nervous. I could see him picking at the hem of his jacket. "Are we going back to live there, Dad?" he asked quietly as we pulled up to the curb in front of the house. "No, buddy," I said, putting the truck in park. "We are just here to do one final chore, and then we are leaving for good." We got out of the truck and walked up the driveway. The house looked different. The locks were changed, the windows were clean, and the oppressive energy that used to radiate from the structure was gone. It was just a building now. I walked to the back of my truck and pulled out a heavy wooden stake with a large metal sign attached to it. I carried it to the center of the pristine front lawn, right where the grass met the sidewalk. I handed Hayes a heavy rubber mallet. "All right?" I said, pointing to the top of the wooden stake. "Hit it as hard as you can." Hayes gripped the mallet with both hands. He swung it down, driving the wooden stake deep into the soft, unfrozen soil. He hit it again, and again, a huge smile breaking across his face as the sign stood firm and tall in the yard. We stepped back to admire our work. The sign was bright red and white. It read, "For sale. Shown by appointment only." I was selling the house. I was selling the entire history of my family's manipulation. I was taking the equity I had built with my own blood, sweat, and tears, and I was going to use it to buy a new home. A home that Silas, Daphne, and Blaine would never have the address to. A home where every single memory would belong to just Hayes and me. "We are going to find a new house," I told Hayes, putting my arm around his shoulders. "Maybe one with a bigger yard. Maybe one closer to the city. What do you think?" He looked up at me, his eyes bright. "Can it have a room for my Lego sets?" "It can have an entire floor for your Lego sets," I promised. He leaned into my side. "Are we actually going to be happy now, Dad?" I looked down at the boy who had chosen me, the boy who had survived a system that had thrown him away, only to be thrown away again by the people who were supposed to love him. "Yes, Hayes," I said, kissing the top of his head. "We are going to have real happiness." We walked back to the truck, leaving the empty house and the ghosts of my family behind. My parents are currently living in a cramped, 2-bedroom apartment in a terrible part of town, paying exorbitant rent because they have zero credit. Blaine is living on a friend's couch, dodging process servers who are trying to serve him with the debt collection lawsuits. Maeve took the kids and filed for divorce. Daphne still leaves me voicemails from blocked numbers. She cries. She wails. She tells me I am a monster who destroyed the family over a boy who does not even share our blood. She tells me I threw away my real family. I never answer. I delete the messages, because I know exactly who my real family is. He is sitting next to me, helping me pick out paint colors for our new house. So I turn to you, Reddit. My family claims I went nuclear, that evicting them with 7 days' notice and cutting off their utilities in the dead of winter was an act of pure evil. They say I should have forgiven them for the sake of family unity. Am I the villain here? Was I wrong to strip them of everything to protect the son I chose to love? Let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you felt any satisfaction seeing these toxic people finally face the consequences of their actions, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We all deserve to be surrounded by people who think we are real. Until next time, stay strong and protect your peace.